It is the recap. It's time for the recap. We're making the recap show. Dun dun dun! Hey everybody, I apologize for being late. It has been a hectic morning and afternoon here at the Casa de la Dungeon Bastard, but I am so glad to be with all of you here, even though I'm a few minutes late. I apologize for that. Thank you for joining me. Welcome to our recap show. Yes, with, as Fuckwood calls me, Broadway Tom Lommel. So, our normal time is normally 4 o'clock. I have started doing the Bearded Man West Improvised Dungeons and Dragons show at 4:30 Pacific over on the Geek and Sundry channel. And that means that I have to leave here at 3:30, well, really closer to 3 o'clock, in order to get there in time to get ahead of the show and whatnot. So we'll probably be moving the recap show up to 2 on a regular basis. I'd like to keep it on Thursday, although that makes my Thursday afternoons kind of stacked. So it may float between Thursday and Friday. But regardless, we have started today's recap. We have made it thus far. Let us continue, shall we not? Let us continue. So, with that in mind, just keep in mind that this, it did fit well at 4 o'clock, but that's going to be an ongoing conflict for the foreseeable rest of the year, which is fine. All right, so last session we've kicked off Chapter 2. I talked about changing up the pace. I thought it would be important after having a fairly, I guess what I would describe as languid kind of role-playing heavy, investigation heavy session. It just had its own nice pace. Everybody got to kind of do some RP with their character and with some of the NPCs and explore the town and discover what Triboar was all about and find some points of interest. I felt like it was time to bam, kick things into gear, take off, do something new, fresh, different, just change the pace up, have the attack, the fire giant assault start, and inject some drama and climactic combat into the flow of our sessions, right? That was my plan. As has been well established and is often bandied about the internet, no plan survives contact with our players. And so that's the danger of picking up immediately where you left off. Because I left them, you're standing in front of this chest, you have peeled back a couple layers of moldy, mildewed clothes, you lift this giant quilted blanket, and underneath you see a man's skeleton curled up inside. So, we did the recap of the session when I got to the game store, and they got us to that point, and they lifted it up, and they see the man's curled up skeleton, and of course, I say, as every DM is wont to do, what do you do next? And I will point out that there is an inherent danger to that question, which is it means that no time has passed, right? And so no time has passed in the campaign world. However, an entire week has passed in the real world, right? And so the danger there is, number one, like players have a lot of time to, if they have thought about it, they have a lot of time to spin around like, okay, here's what we want to do. If you left it on a very serious cliffhanger moment where the stakes are high, you will often see like player chit-chat going back, okay, all right, wait a minute. All right, so here's the thing. I've got Bless going for 3 more rounds. Then when I drop that, I'm going to do Spirit Guardians. That's a different concentration spell. You know what? I tell you what, how about we screw Bless, so you see players like take that week of time and strategize. I wanted to say strategize because I just think it sounds like a cooler DM word, but strategize is technically correct English. at any rate, they will take that whole week and just wring the juice out of it in terms of, here's what we're going to do, boom, 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 even though they may not necessarily know what all of the monster's tactics are going to be, right? So sometimes they can get ahead of themselves. All right, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this. The other aspect or the other opportunity that comes up is that you're assuming, boom, we're going to do it was a clean break, we're going to do a clean pickup, like we're going to drop the hammer right for where we left off and get right back into it. And unfortunately, a week of real time has passed, and now they're your players get a little bit lost of like, oh yeah, all right, so. And then they start reviewing the facts in their head and trying to remember the details of the things that they discovered. And that naturally leads them to go, well, okay, now wait a minute. Like, where is she right now? And so instead of picking up right where you left off and thinking that you're going to kickstart the session with jumping right into the action and let's get this scene wrapped up, and the players are going to put the bow on this particular encounter, and then we're going to be able to move on, which was my intent behind that question and setting things up. Instead, you actually can prompt more reflection, more second guessing of things that they have discovered, more investigation, which has the bottom line effect of slowing down the conclusion or the resolution of that particular scene, right? So my DM intent was, okay, what do you guys do? And also there's a natural human reaction of when you put that kind of emphasis or you put that sort of pressure on them. Okay, what do you guys do? The natural human reaction is like, okay, all right, I don't want to give a response right away. I don't want to have, like, now I feel like, okay, the stakes got raised again. Okay, I'm under no obligation to give an answer right away. So now I need to really think about, oh, what am I going to do next? He's saying this so urgently. This has got to be important. So I bet now I have to stop and think about what I'm going to do next. So even though you may have the intent of just trying to get things wrapped up, when you couple that sort of urgency with the technique, I almost said mistake, with the technique of picking up right where you left off, as I found out last night, it can actually slow things down rather than pull things together to a nice conclusion. Now, I think a better way of handling this thing, just before we get into what actually happened, a better way of handling this thing would have potentially been, okay, you find this skeleton, you think it's weird, you collect it you collect the trunk and drag it over to Earlham's. All right, so it's the next morning. What do you want to do? Now, I've just hijacked a lot of the player's agency and initiative. However, we can now cut to the scene of like Earlham, like, well, what's the deal with this? How come? What's this skeleton all about? And you can have a scene with Earlham. The other natural inclination for the players is like, well, we weren't done exploring that place, so we got to go back over there. But if your goal is to really get that scene kind of tied up, you can consider doing a time jump and filling in the blanks of the character's actions since you've had a week in between. It's also perfectly fair to go, okay, guys, we've got a lot of things on our plate. I'm going to do a little bit of a time jump just to compress what we got left over from last week. And your players, 85% of the time, are going to be cool with that. So if you give an explanation for why you're doing it, you can kind of sweep the rug out from under them a little bit, so to speak. Keep that in mind if you're having trouble pacing, plotting your sessions, especially if you're having trouble starting your sessions. That's a valid technique, but it's got to be coupled with an explanation of why you're stepping on their role as the players, why you're hijacking or removing their agency. I didn't do any of that. That's fine. I thought I could get this scene tied up fairly quickly, and I was mistaken about that. So they got into this chest. They looked at it. They did some investigation. They found some things. So the encounter as written is, if they touch the bones come to life. And then a D4 rounds later, if they touch the bones again, the bones come to life. And a D4 rounds later, if there's still bones, the bones come to life. So that's what's supposed to happen. Although it's just a skeleton, it's only got a few hit points, and it only does a marginal amount of damage, right? And then somehow the players are supposed to kind of like get the idea that, okay, well, this is her husband, and but she's too addled. She's too mentally addled. She's actually technically insane. She can't give she can't give a full accounting of what happened, or the fact that she murdered him, or even why. But that involves some sort of greater restoration spell or something like that, right? And unfortunately, the guy who's playing the life cleric probably didn't have it prepared and probably never even knew. And I don't know at 5th level if he's even capable of casting that spell, right? So we come to an issue where the solution and the rewards and the explanation of what has happened in this set of given circumstances is either not occurring to the players or not actually available to them. Problematic. And I kind of wrestled with it. I wanted to give them the opportunity to kind of figure out, this lady is rules definition insane. There are things that you can do about it if you decide to pursue it. You could take this matter to Darathra. You could take this matter to Erlem, your Zentrum contact who gave you this mission. Like, I wanted to let them come up with the idea that they could do these things. Wasn't really sticking with them. Like, their next move after they animated this thing a couple times and shot it and killed it and put a blanket over it and just left it in a pile. And then they were like, let's go down and talk to this woman, because this is clearly her husband, and we want to find out like what she thinks happened to him and why he's locked up in here and blah, 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 blah. Now, that brings us to the other issue in this scenario, which is that she's crazy, right? Rules definition, insane. That's fine. It's an interesting, like, not straightforward. It's a good explanation for why she still lives in the house and why she acts so bizarre, but it doesn't get them to the bottom line definition or explanation of what has transpired here. And that's the part that I struggled with. So they interviewed her, and we had a great time role-playing the fact that she's nuts. And we kept coming, like, I was coming up with things, because it doesn't really say, like, how she's crazy. It doesn't give a definition of whatever madness she's suffering. You know, clearly she must be kind of paranoid because she spies on people all the time. But so I started making stuff out of whole cloth. And so we started talking about the darkness and the whispers in the darkness, and the darkness made me do it. And, you know, it's a little bit of Gollum from Lord of the Rings. She's kind of coming off as this weird split personality type of person, and she's hearing voices and that sort of stuff. It worked. I mean, it was a great role-playing scene, but I was really like pumping the improv pedals hard in order to keep this thing going. Now, in terms of the player experience, the players did not know that, right? Like, it was seamless and fun, and the nice thing about improv, you know, something, I'm going to give you a tip on improvising, and especially improvising insane characters, which is they repeat themselves a lot. Now, there's two advantages to this. One, you don't have to make up a lot of new facts, right? You don't have to invent a long-winded rant that goes off and talks about 15 different things and is scattered and is all over the place, and you're trying to, like, you know, tap into your well of whatever improvisational resources you have in the back of your head, like whatever sources you draw on to synthesize new material. You're not worried about spewing a whole bunch of that stuff and running dry and stalling out and either giving them contradictory information or just not, like, failing to give them any, and kind of showing like, I'm making stuff up here, guys, and I don't know what to say next off the top of my head. Like, that kind of metagame moment pulls everyone out of the RP scene that's going on, and they're like, oh, well, we're no longer in the book, so maybe what we're asking here isn't actually important or relevant, right? Like, that's the metagame danger of stalling out when you're improvising, is the players, suddenly the veil is lifted and they go, oh, we're just, obviously we're way off, so, like, who cares? Even though you may be trying to bridge the gap between two things. And it's either not your fault, or you're actually trying to, like, deftly make a maneuver between one set of given circumstances and another in order to, for whatever reason, right? So when they see you stall out, that's often a red flag for the players. Uh-oh, we're off the book here. If we're off the book, then he's probably not going to make up treasure for us to find, or make up a monster for us to fight, or make up XP for us to have. So we should try to find our way back onto the book. That's what players think. For better and for worse. Like, it's a legit, understandable response. If you can cover it over and they don't know, then all the better, right? You don't want to have that moment where they're suddenly pulled out of the action and they're thinking to themselves, are we doing something that's honestly just wasting our time, that's not going to result in XP treasure or an exciting combat scene? Wait, did I go offline? I think I'm here. I think I'm back. This is a typical Thursday afternoon. It says I'm live. All right, apparently I'm live. Okay. So you guys in chat, you let me know where I left off, if there was a little bump. But I guess where I was leaving off was, you never want to have a moment where the players stop and think to themselves, we're engaged in an activity that's not going to yield XP, treasure, magic items, or an exciting monster fight / encounter, right? So why don't you want that? Because then players feel like they're wasting their time. There's not going to be a payout at the end of this. So if the DM doesn't have something to feed me to continue the role-playing scene, and we're not actually getting meaningful hints and clues that are leading up to some sort of payoff within the game, then let's cash out and let's find a different avenue of attack, or let's just stop doing this thing. So the great thing about repeating things as a character who is suffering madness is you don't have to, it's harder to show that card. You can just talk about the darkness. Last night I literally started doing a bit about, the darkness calls you, swirling and screeching, swirling and screeching, swirling and screeching. Okay. I just repeated like the same 3 words over and over and over again, giving it a little bit of RP performance, right? But it informs the players, this person is suffering madness. It gives them a hook to play off of. You can tell that the stakes are being raised by the way that the RP, builds to a greater volume, etc. All of those things, like it works, and all I had to do was repeat the same 3 words over and over and over again. I made my point. And then you can have, her be distracted, but you're not constantly fabricating new facts. Okay? So that's the one thing, is when a character who's mad, like crazy mad, repeats themselves, you don't have to fabricate new details. The other thing that it does, the second part of it, is it allows you to introduce and reinforce a theme. Okay? So we've got, what do we know just from that short monologue that I gave that was a total of about 7 words, right? Darkness, swirling, screeching, and it seems like maybe she yells, like she really gets caught up in it and starts yelling a lot, right? Well, those are all terrific fantasy tropes that I can hang a hat on, right? Darkness. I can go all kinds of places with darkness. Maybe she's afraid of going out in the daytime. Maybe she has some sort of secret passage that leads underground. Maybe she's in league with dark forces from the shadow dimension, the plane of shadows. Maybe it just means a dark demon. Right there I just listed 5 things off of the word darkness. Swirling. What's, swirling? Okay, so I think of a spiral. Okay, well, with my background, I think, okay, Tharizdun is an interesting deity who had like a spiral and an obelisk and an obex and whatnot. And that's also a legitimate source of themes that I can play off into. And honestly, all I have to do is start going, okay, so when you go down into her basement, you can tell that there's all of these spirals. She's got a spiral scratched into the back of her hand. There's spirals scratched into the wall. We got down into and I decided that her house has a basement. She was like, go into my basement. And we went down there and they found this glass, like aquarium type of thing with a cloth over it, and they pulled it back and there was a poisonous snake inside. Number one, I had to get across like how this guy got murdered, because they had to determine that he wasn't murdered by brute force. He didn't have his skull bashed open. He didn't have like a sword, spear marks in his ribs, or didn't have any broken ribs. His limbs weren't broken, anything like that. Like he clearly did not die from extreme violent force. So I had to help them establish how the murder occurred, because they weren't just at that point going to catch on to, they weren't going to cast a greater restoration and have her get her sanity back and explain what happened. But they go down there and they find the snake. The snake's got a spiral curved into the top of its head. It's been ritually scarred with a spiral. All right, boom, there we had another incorporation of a theme that we brought up from a 7-word monologue. The screeching thing I kind of let go. She did a lot of screeching, so I didn't felt like I have to incorporate that. But I went into this whole thing where she kept yammering about the darkness and yammering about spirals, and the darkness took her. Don't take my loved one away. Like there were little details were peppered into her ravings that gave the players, as they were listening, more of a picture. But I didn't have to like lay out all the details in sequential order and tell the story as if she were completely sane and like, oh, I've been cured. Here's the thing, Rather, I actually I was allowed to spool out details here and there in non-chronological order if I so chose, and then they could draw the web of the story together themselves, which is far more rewarding for the players than it is for them to sit and listen to a 7-sentence monologue about, well, here's what actually happened. The players are the ones who want to say, hey, guys, I figured it out. Here's what actually happened. That is that is the main goal of any sort of investigation challenge in a role-playing game. It's honestly one of the core goals of almost any role-playing game. Hey guys, I figured out what happened, what's happening, who's responsible. Hey guys, I figured out what's going on. That's not the DM's job to tell the players what's going on. It's incredibly unsatisfying when the DM tells the players what's going on. They want to figure it out themselves. Keep that in mind. Like, I really can't stress that point enough. That is the difference between leading a party through an adventure and bringing the party to the door of the dungeon and letting them explore. It's some deep stuff today on disorganized play. I'm just gonna lay that out there. Like, that's a key piece of my GMing philosophy. And one of the main differences behind that is when you bring them to the door and they start figuring out what they think is going on, you have to be willing to accept what they say as the right answer. Sometimes it's okay if they go, oh, I think that cleric in the red robes is in league with that band of gnolls, and they must have sent that group of gnolls to go and ambush the town moneylender on his way to the village. And then you go, it turns out that the Red Priest has always been jealous of the moneylender and has had a vendetta against him. However, they've sworn a blood pact that they would not harm or otherwise interfere with each other's business. And it was merely a coincidence that the gnolls ambushed the moneylender on his way to the village. As a player, the truth of the first given circumstances is far more satisfying than the truth of being told, well, you're close. You almost got it. I mean, there are some games where you have to figure out the murder mystery, and it helps if there's a predefined path. But it goes back to my advice of, as the DM, your job is not to be right. Your job is to be intriguing. And then latch on to what the players think is right and find a way to make that more intriguing, but then ultimately satisfying. And I'm sure there's a certain contingent of gamers out there who are like, well, if the players are always right, then what are the stakes? You know, why even play if you know when you sit down that you're going to be right? I didn't say that they were immediately right. And I also said your job is to find a way to make what they think is right more intriguing. That usually means there's a twist or a plot hook that suddenly changes and there's a revelation and they see their given circumstances in a whole new light that suddenly makes more sense. Now, a lot of DMs struggle with, okay, well, in order to get that satisfying twist, I need to make sure that I nail down all the different things that lead up to that, and then we need to very carefully control what they discover so that when they find this guy who has a black mask hanging in his closet, they tie it back together that, oh, he's actually the moneylender the whole time. Couple things. One, in my experience, that kind of control is far too onerous and demanding and shuts down player, or leads to shutting down player inquisitiveness. They try stuff and then you keep telling them, because they got to keep within your little cone of given circumstances, whenever they try and color outside the lines, you're like, and you have to do a lot of reining them in and push back and that sort of stuff. The second thing that I will say about that, dang, there was there was a second point there that I wanted to make about making making that plot hook, like making that twist. Oh, yeah, I've got it. Most of the time, your players don't pay that much attention. Yeah. There will be circumstances where they go, well, wait a minute. So if he was the moneylender, then how does that make sense that he didn't, that the priest in the red robes didn't know that he was the guy in the black mask? Like, couldn't he have just blah, 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 blah? And so, sure, sometimes the players can trap you when you've pulled a twist that hasn't been completely thought through. But a lot of times the players are just like, oh, go, cool. Like, they're happy that they found the answer. They don't question it as much as you might think. Or they weren't paying as much attention. They weren't taking notes that might show the plot hole in what you were doing. Thirdly, it's a world of fantasy adventure. It has magic. Anything is possible. You have to be careful with that, but it gives you a lot of excuses and a lot of ways out. Okay? So when players get hung up on something, as long as you can justify a way within reasonable bounds of the rules, as long as you can justify a way within reasonable bounds of the rules, they will accept that twist, that little surprise, a little revelation. I've expounded an awful lot. Let's get back to our recap. So, they interrogated the woman who runs the 6 windows. That was interesting. It was a great RP scene. They had a lot of fun. It dragged on because they kept wanting to like talk to her more and just try and trip off her personality and figure out like could they switch her over from the paranoid woman to the like actual murderer type person, etc., etc., etc. Unfortunately, at some point, the fighter rogue decided that the best way to search her bedroom was to do it FBI style and just grab chests of drawers and smash them open and upend the bed and cut the mattress open and rip stuff out of the closet, etc., etc., etc. And he did this while they were interrogating her, 25, 30 feet down the hallway. So she hears this happening, and she had already accused them of being brigands and murderers and robbers and burglars. 3 redundant words, but she had accused them of multiple, of breaking in. And they had sort of assuaged her fears. No, we're customers. Oh, okay, great. How much are you paying? But then when she heard like this ruckus going on in her room, then she became convinced they were burglars. And so she starts screaming, help, I'm being robbed. And, she starts screaming bloody murder. And they make a move for her to like grab her and kind of subdue her. And it's like midnight. Unfortunately, the guy who did this rolled a natural 1. And so he completely botches his roll. Well, it's time to pay the piper on the dice. She flings the kitchen door open out to the back and yells, help, I'm being murdered, I'm being robbed, help, thieves. Now keep in mind, just 2 weeks prior, thieves had already tried to break into the Boar's Rest up, just up the road. So the town's probably a little sensitive about brigand forces out of Yartar trying to break into people's houses. They get her subdued. They take her down the basement. They discover this weird snake thing, blah, 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 blah. They're checking out, like, oh, let's look at this snake. Oh, this is weird. Oh, this is... And there's this big barrel of, like, fruit that's kind of, like, moldy and rotten and stuff like that. And that was all interesting. But they did that for 3 or 4 minutes, and then they hear boots in the hallway, boots on the back step, boots going up the stairs, boots coming in the kitchen. The Lady Protector, Denethra shows up with a bunch of the veteran guys, right? The 12, part of the 12, her personal militia that helps her enforce the law. Well, now they've been caught, and it does not look like at one point earlier in the session, she had gone upstairs to spy on them, and she was looking through a knothole in the wood, and spine, and they had tried to cast hold person on her through the knothole in the wood, and she jerked back to avoid getting trapped in the spell. So she essentially made her saving throw. But I ruled that she hit her head on like the corner of the bed. She was like laying underneath like part of the bed, and she hit her head and kind of knocked herself out. And there's like blood pouring all over the place and whatnot. And they got her stabilized. They wrapped a bandage around her head, but like they picked her up and they're like holding her down. And I'm like, you're getting blood all over your shirt and stuff, right? So they get there, like the cops essentially show up, and she's, she's got this bloody bandage on. She's ranting about being murdered, blah, blah, blah. And the one guy's got, like, blood all over his shirt. They look guilty, guilty, guilty. Well, so then, they rounded everybody up, with the exception of the fighter rogue. The fighter rogue managed to hide in the basement, and he escaped detection through a really good stealth roll, which is fine. But then he's like, I want to sneak out of the house, sneak down the road, and then sneak back towards either Earlham's or the tower or wherever, and like pretend that I was just in my bed the whole night. All right, great. Well, the town's on alert now, so I need you to give me 3 stealth checks. I want 1 for getting out of the house, 1 for going down the road, and 1 for coming back up the road. And unfortunately, one of the guards nat 20'd his perception check on the way back up the road and spied him and was like, hey, what are you doing? I think you need to come over here and talk to me. So we then went from this interesting but convoluted investigation of the 6 windows and the insane woman who runs it, and then we got into kind of like a political, or we got to get into a police interrogation scene where, all right, I tell you, she started off with like, what happened here? And they all started talking. She's like, no, you know what? Nobody say anything. We're going to go back to the tower, and I'm going to interview you one by one and see whose stories line up and whose stories do not. And that was fine. I did kind of hand wave like, okay, we're not gonna have one-on-one. We don't have time to role play the one-on-one interrogation for each and every character here. But what we are going to do is, I just want to know: are you telling the true story of what happened? Yes or no? Are you telling the true story? So anybody who's not, I need a deception check, and then she's gonna try and make her wisdom check against you. So that was a quick, easy way to, take care of, did the interrogation go well or did the interrogation go badly? It also, so I did that, and she was like, okay, well, given that you found these bones and the circumstances and her very obviously precarious mental condition, I'm going to give you guys a pass on this for now. So they got out of it, right? But of course, as they were being led over there, I'm like, make a perception check. As they're being led back to the tower of the Lady Protector, I'm like, make a perception check. And somebody nat 20'd that on the way over. And I'm like, okay, well, you see that the lights are on over at Earlham's place, and it looks like there's maybe like the shadow of, a silhouette. It looks like there's a silhouette in the window, maybe looking out the window. He had told them, do not draw attention to yourselves. Do not stir shit up. So they were like, oh boy, we're in trouble. At any rate, also, this gave me the opportunity by individually interrogating them. The bard who had sort of tipped his hand earlier that he was a harper and knew something was going on, he had a one-on-one with Denethra. And at some point during this interrogation, he tells the truth. He gets her story. She kind of puts her boots up on the table and grabs her Harper badge and sets it in the middle of the room and goes, now there was something you wanted to tell me? And he's like, oh yeah, okay, I'm a Harper. Your town is being infiltrated by a crime network. We're here to da-da-da. And she's like, okay, do you understand how a deep cover operation works? And they're like, okay, yeah, we're kind of. She's like, you're drawing a lot of attention. You're like, if I had not known that you were part of the Harpers, if you hadn't sort of, clued me in a little bit, you'd all be in jail right now. So it was another chance for me to reinforce to the characters, like, you gotta be self. And then on top of that, they got released from jail, and they went back over to Earlham's, and Earlham was like, you guys are screwing with my setup. Do not screw with my setup. I feel like I have to mark you down a grade on your little report card that I'm going to send Charlton Helmstar. I don't think you want a bad report card with Charlton Helmstar, now do you? No. So he's like, it's 3:30. I'm going to bed. I suggest you do the same. Put yourselves up in the stables and try and sleep this one off. So they wake up in the morning. They did a couple follow-up pieces of business. They woke up in the stable and they heard hoofbeats, and they see Lady Chanderol, the Lord Protector, whatever, pointing down the road, and the 12 riders, they take off, and it's clear that they're armed for some sort of more significant combat than just a normal patrol. They're riding in force. They've got their spears with them. They got bows slung over their shoulders. They got their swords, etc. Like, normally, if they were just going to do a patrol, they'd maybe have their bow and a sword, but they definitely would not have their spears with them. So I'm like, something weird is going on. They go over to talk to her. It's like, well, we've had reports of orc attacks to the southeast, and the 12 are going to go, check it out and ascertain what the forces are, and if we need to muster additional troops and whatnot. Oh, okay. And then the Lady Protector was like, oh, by the way, is this yours? And she just gets out this boulder, and she rolls it over, and in pig feces, it says, see you at the Citadel. And they're like, oh, that's ours. That's from our friend. Yeah, that's ours. That was a message for us. She's like, well, we found that in the north of town this morning around 7 o'clock. So you're welcome. That was that. So that was fun. All right. They went back, talked to Earlham. They were having breakfast, discussing the day's events. They had some business. They had to talk to him because they had wanted to set up, the Bard had wanted to set up an audition at the Wizard's residence up at the mansion. And we got some of that cleared up. And then I was like, as you're getting ready to take your next bite of sandwich, because it's brunch time, all of a sudden you hear, Kathwak! And this boulder lands in the middle of the parade grounds. It's a Kathwak! And another one rolls. And we got into the Fire Giant Assault. It was like this rolling thunder type of scenario where the Axe Beak Riders are out front, and then the Orog Shock Troops are following up, and then another 120 feet behind them, 60, 90, 120 feet behind them, suddenly the two Fire Giants kind of rise over, above these houses, and the houses erupt in flame, and they're hurling boulders at the tower and knocking bits and chunks off of the tower in the center of town. So then we got into combat, and we got through about 4 rounds of combat before the store was closing. We had to cut it off, wrap things up, and call it a night. So that's the deal. If you check my Wikipedia page, the thing that's interesting about it is completely fake. It is not actually on Wikipedia. That is hosted on my own local server. That's just a little aside for those of you who have decided to do some Googling on Tom Lommel. So that's the recap of the session, right? We've got about 8 minutes left. I'm not going to have time to do a Q&A today because I will have to wrap things up right at 3 o'clock. I apologize for that, and I apologize for not starting directly on time. However, we did get to do some good GM philosophizing, so I feel like there was some valuable information that kind of filled in the role of that particular segment. At any rate, so I talked last time about doing a battle map like I had done for the Orcish battle, where it was a long roll of gaming paper, and it did, a variety of, like, I'd draw the buildings on, and they could place themselves and take cover, and we could set buildings on fire and get a pile of minis out on the table and have civilians running around. One of the things I did do during the combat was, like, whenever the Orogs or the Axe Beaks were up, if nobody was directly around them, they ran down a civilian and chopped the guy down. And so I'm tallying civilian casualties as they go through, right? So that should have reinforced to them that the assault that's happening here is taking its toll on the town. They didn't take any kind of action to ameliorate that at all. They did not yell, like, get away from the tower, retreat, you know, any of that kind of stuff. Like, they did not give the townsfolk any sort of instructions that would help them minimize collateral damage. I think everybody really was like, oh, they're all waiting to get their licks in and pull off their sweet combat moves and make sure that they got to do the cool stuff that they wanted to do. Okay, I mean, that's fine, but I'm marking down that these people are dead, probably for a reason. Nobody latched onto that and felt like they were going to take an action outside of combat actions, or even alongside combat actions, to direct forces, direct the townspeople into a way that would minimize damage to them. Okay, not my problem, not my fault. I was giving them a hint that bad things were happening. I haven't decided what the penalty for that is yet, but we'll get there next week. So I talked about doing this very detailed battle map, and I started looking at the scale of what's happening, and you're looking at, you know, a good 140-foot wide swath of destruction, and then a long swath of buildings and parade grounds and all that kind of stuff. And I realized in the time that I had to draw it and pull it together, while I could have fit it on a roll of gaming paper, I didn't have the time to actually draw it all. And a big issue with that is that it's in sort of, the map is in a little bit of an isometric format. I mean, it's in a skewed isometric format that's not 100% on 45-degree angles. It's a slightly different angle one. And that makes it difficult. There's not a top-down view. So I was sitting there trying to translate, like, okay, I've even got, you know, like a little note card here. Probably a couple different little note cards. Is this the one? It's not the one. I've got a little piece of paper here that I tried to... Can you see it? That I tried to, like, figure out, okay, this is 50 feet, this is 100 feet. How big is this building? How much room is there in between this? Da-da-da. And I didn't have time to do all the details. I didn't have time to do the type of map, the style of map that I wanted to do. I was having to do this paradigm shift of translating it from isometric to a top-down, which wasn't really working very great for me. And so I bailed on it. I bailed on doing a detailed map. I also thought about doing kind of just sketching it in real time, but without an overhead view of here's how far this is. I knew it was going to be a lot of fudging things, and I felt like it was going to eat too much time, and I was going to, like, I was going to start being off. The map was going to be off and not... It got messy, right? It started getting too messy, and I was running out of time. So what I decided to do instead was basically, like, steal an idea from Fate and some other games, of not using tight battle ranges, but using basically like bands of engagement. Okay? So I set out 3 sets of tiles. One band of tiles is you're in melee range. Okay? Whoever's standing on this tile, it's not like you can, it's not an actual, like, place, but let's say, okay, anybody who's on here, they're in melee contact, melee range with whatever forces are also here. And then I put out another tile next to it. This represents short range ranged weapons. It's a little redundant, but ranged weapons that you would probably throw or have a range of less than like 60 or 80 or something like that, right? And then I put down a third tile, and that was long range, okay? So you're obviously, at that point, if you're on the third tile, you can only shoot bows, longbows, crossbows. You can't throw a javelin that far without disadvantage. So now with those battle zones, I know who can attack who can throw weapons at this guy or use spells that have a roughly 60-foot range. And then here I know, okay, what's our artillery range? Okay, who's going to snipe? Who's going to use a spell that has 120 foot, 110 foot, whatever kind of range it is, without having to get into the nitty gritty of like count. Okay, and then I go over 2, and now I'm out of movement. I was like, no, you want to use your move to go from one zone to the next? No problem. I took some photos that I wanted to show you, but I didn't have time to upload them today because my day's been a little packed with different things to do. But so I did that for the axe beaks who were out front. Okay, then behind them at artillery range, thrown weapon range, melee range, I had another set for the Orog shock troops. So they're obviously like way out of range for anybody who's at the far end of the spectrum, but we know they're kind of like, it's a parade of monsters, and then X number of squares, hexes behind them, or tiles behind them, zones behind them, were the fire giants. And you had kind of like a layout, like basically like a parade of the combat, and you could move back and forth if you so chose, or they would advance on you. You knew where to cast spells. But I had a map of the town alongside basically what was just this abstract row or column of tiles that was divided into different zones. And it ran fairly well. I did fall into the trap. If I were to do it all over again, I would probably just take those large Post-it notes and lay them one by one by one next to each other, like those 4x4 Post-it notes or whatever. No grids on them. So the problem that I had was I had these squares that had grids on them, and people wanted to count the grids like they do any other time that they're in a combat. Okay, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so I'm going to move 1, 2, 3. I'm like, no, this is not a map. This is not literally how far it is. This represents somewhere between 20 to 50 feet, and it's not exact. If you want to take a single move to move up to the next band, that's fine. You want to take a double move to move into melee range, that I'm going to slop that. Like, that's fine. But don't tick 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 count squares. Don't count squares off the column and go, okay, well, I'm actually 45 feet this way. No, you're not. Like, you can say I'm over here by these bushes. That's fine. You're still in the same band of, unless you want to, I can put another tile out. Okay, you're in a long-range band over there. So that's a technique that I used. Sometimes Sly Flourish talks about using essentially like what are encounter zones, battle zones, that sort of thing. Doing a zone combat. Mike Shea, Sly Flourish, is a big fan of theater of the mind. I like to run these big set piece combats as tabletop, on the grid. Let's break up the minis. Let's draw some terrain. Let's screw some stuff up. Let's play the chess game of this goes off over here. I move 15 feet, shoot, go back around the corner another 10 feet, etc. Like, I think some of those mechanical tactics that are built into the game come to life when you get on the grid. But I also understand the advantage of just kind of like painting the scene and describing what's going on and negotiating it through theater of the mind, right? Also a fan of that. This was my hybrid way of kind of having my cake and eating it too, right? It was abstract, but we had an idea of how the forces were laid out. So people wouldn't say, like, wait a minute, how's that fire giant throwing boulders at me? Isn't he way too far away? No, you saw him move 2 bands up towards you, and he has a range of 120 without disadvantage. Therefore, he can hurl boulders at you. You're like, he's going to drop some rocks. Okay, So they had a picture that gave them definite like markers as to where the effects of the encounters began and end. But I didn't have to go and spend a lot of time drawing buildings. We didn't have to spend a lot of time counting squares. I want to go over here. We didn't have to get into the nitty-gritty of grid combat, but we had the advantage of a formal and tangible representation of what was happening on the little, sheet battle map that I had drawn or that I had printed off. So those are battle zones. It's 3:03. We're kind of almost caught up actually, but I have to unfortunately call that the recap show today. I apologize again for starting 5-10 minutes late. I know I shorted you a little bit, but we also went a little bit long on Tuesday, so maybe I'll try and make it up to you next Tuesday if you have some questions or whatever. Please do comment on videos. Shoot me either a DM or an at Dungeon Bastard. I will be happy to pick through those things and give you advice on how your game's going, whether you're playing Storm King's Thunder or you're playing something else. Always happy to field questions and give my opinion and share some of my insights that I've gleaned over my years of playing and DMing. So that wraps it up for today. We got some great stuff coming up the rest of the week. We always kind of close on the calendar. Tonight, well, tonight we don't have anything on the calendar. If you are so inclined, in an hour and 25 minutes, I will be DMing Bearded Men West with D&D the Improvised campaign over on Geek and Sundry. Tune in for that if you haven't seen it. It's super fun. It's a crazy concept I've talked about before. Tomorrow night is Edge of the Empire, Never Tell Me the Odds, our Fantasy Flight Star Wars game. Saturday starts a whole new RPG session for us, a whole new show, Masks, which is a superhero show. I'm super pumped for that. I hope you guys tune in. I think that's going to be fun and interesting. It has some definite hotness attached to it. It was a big kind of winner at Gamehole Con this year. There's a lot of people playing Masks and really enjoying it. At 5 o'clock, Phoenix Dawn Command is up with a very special episode, as I mentioned on Tuesday. I think if you've been a fan of that show, you'll want to tune in because at least a few significant events will be taking place on Saturday's episode. If you can't tune in live, of course, you can always catch us on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/savingthrowshow. Please follow us on Twitter and Instagram. I guess I do not Instagram, so I'm an old man. I'm an old man. I talk just like Grav Galati's characters, all of them creaky old men that always speak like this. I'm just giving Grav crap because we gave him crap at Monday Night Dungeon Fight. That's it for me. That's it for the rest of for my portion of the week. I will be back on Tuesday with our prep session of Disorganized Play, where we're going to talk about picking up the fight. Like I said, we left off at round 4. The fire giants have not been touched yet. They've picked away at the orcish forces, but I have a feeling those fire giants are going to be a lot tougher to take down or drive off than the players think. They already got hit once or twice with just some boulders, and when the greatswords come out, there's going to be a great amount of anxiety. Oh. All right, so that's enough of my jackassery for one day. I appreciate each and every one of you tuning in. Again, if you have questions or comments, drop them down below. I'd love to help you out in any way that I can, or shoot me a line on Twitter. So with that, that's going to do it for me. Until next time, let's dungeon!